So without further ado, I will get into some of our thoughts for the next MSI Major Science Initiatives Fund competition. So before I highlight, as I said, the purpose of the presentation is really to highlight some of the changes, but I think it's important to also mention things that are not changing. And so this competition, as with our previous one, will contribute to the ongoing operating and maintenance costs of facilities of national importance. So we're maintaining the eligibility criteria to support facilities with a national mandate and not facilities of a regional or local nature. And we're also focused on operating and maintenance costs as we have been in previous competitions. So we'll not be implementing a sort of a full life cycle approach that would include infrastructure upgrades in this particular competition. So what we are doing, however, is we're looking at modifying our objectives, tweaking the wording essentially, and of the objectives and the criteria to better reflect the current research, the current landscape of large research facilities. We're taking the lessons we've learned from our previous competition and from the midterm review to try and improve some of our review processes and where possible, streamline these to make them as efficient as possible. And our overall goal, of course, is to ensure that we have a fair and competitive process to make funding recommendations to our board of directors for the next funding period. These recommendations will go to our board for its June 2022 meeting for the funding to start in 2023. It's important to note that unlike the midterm review, this is a new competition. We expect to invite proposals from both existing funded facilities and new applicants to the fund. So it will be a competitive process where the recommendations to the board will be based on the merit review and the best investment of the funds that we have available. As I mentioned, we're not making wholesale changes to the objectives. The three objectives are still focused on the same overarching areas, so notably excellence in the research, optimal operations, and appropriate governance and management. For those of you that recall the 2017 objectives, you'll note that we dropped some of the language in the first objective around securing and strengthening national research facilities. And this is really to reflect a shift in the landscape where, in the first couple of competitions, we're really more targeted, almost at crisis mode, putting out fires. The facilities had no options or no opportunities for operating funding, and so this was really critical to secure and stabilize the operations of our national facilities. Now that we've been providing funding through the MSI fund for over 10 years, the CFI is also receiving stable funding from the federal government. We thought it was past time to sort of move away from some of that language and keep the focus really on the excellent research that these facilities enable, that leads to obviously benefits to Canadians as well, and benefits writ large, so not just economic benefits, but social, health, and environmental benefits as well. The second objective we didn't really change. Third objective, we also made, I guess, a slight wording change, again, not to change the focus, but really to refer to responsible stewardship of these facilities, again, through the adoption of best practices in governance and management. The other change that we made in the wording of this third objective was really, in fact, to remove reference to long-term strategic planning that was there in 2017. I want to emphasize this is really not to diminish the importance of this aspect of governance and management, but really to keep the objective at a high level. And you'll note later on, as we go through some of the assessment criteria, that language is still there in terms of the importance of long-term strategic planning. But we've also added several other key components. So in addition to long-term planning, we're also incorporating language around data and cybersecurity, along with equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I'll speak more to this as we get to the relevant criteria. I just wanted to highlight that while we did sort of drop that language from the objective, it is still a critical part of the goals of this competition. So the $1 million question is, how many of those millions do we have? And the answer is 660 million over the next funding period. This is essentially a flat budget compared to our current funding level. So if you'll recall, in the previous competition in 2017, we had 400 million over a 5-year period. But in the intervening time, we also extended this by an extra year and also made adjustments in 2019 when we increased our contribution to up to 60% for some of the facilities that we fund. So accounting for those adjustments, the $660 million for the next funding cycle is largely a status quo type budget. It doesn't allow for significant expansion of the operating budgets that we currently support. The other thing I want to emphasize, of course, is this needs to accommodate both requests for funding from existing MSI facilities and for facilities not currently supported through the MSI. So there is no reserved portion of this budget for current facilities. It's an open competition. And so there could be fairly significant pressures on this budget in the next funding competition. So you may be asked at the expert review, for example, to discuss questions regarding your ability to operate without some of the requested funding if there are significant budget pressures going forward. Regarding eligible costs, we didn't make any changes to this competition to the eligible costs. So again, we're focused on operating and maintenance costs. As before, you can continue and include minor upgrades as part of the sort of routine operating maintenance of the facility, but no major infrastructure purchases. I mentioned here contingency. These are still allowed up to a maximum of 10%, but strictly for administrative purposes, we're going to be asking that these be presented only in the last year of the budget. You can still request if there are situations that require access to these contingency funds. You can still request them earlier, but essentially by putting them in the last year, it avoids us having to reprofile any unused contingency from year to year. So it's just an administrative change in how we're accounting for those funds. As mentioned, the eligibility criteria are substantively the same as the 2017 competition. The only change we've made is to increase the minimum threshold in annual operating and maintenance costs from $500,000 to $1 million a year. And given the minimal changes we made to the eligibility criteria and to try and streamline our process, we will not be requiring facilities that were funded in the 2017 competition to reestablish their eligibility to apply to this fund. So in 2017, everybody had to come in as a clean slate, and the multidisciplinary committee determined which facilities were eligible to come in. In this competition, we're essentially giving a free pass for our currently funded facilities to submit a proposal in this particular competition. New facilities or facilities that aren't currently supported through the MSI fund will, of course, have to submit documentation to address all 8 eligibility criteria, and we will have a committee review those to determine which ones are eligible. So as I mentioned, the process will be slightly different then between existing currently funded facilities and new applicants to the fund. So for anyone that is not currently supported, we'll ask that you submit an expression of interest. So this would essentially be a very brief email to the CFI, essentially a paragraph to describe what the facility is and an estimate of the annual operating budget. This is really for our purposes in terms of planning the competition and planning the review process for the NOIs that are coming in, and really is not a very long document that we require. New facilities will, however, have to submit an NOI that addresses all 8 eligibility criteria. I say new facilities, I should be more specific, facilities that are not currently funded in the 2017 competition. So these are obviously not necessarily just new facilities, but these are new applicants to the fund. For the currently funded facilities, the notice of intent will not be assessed, but we still do request that you submit one. And this would be for our planning purposes to get a sense of the budget that's going to be asked for the next funding cycle, and also to receive the suggested reviewers for the review process. Once the NOIs have been received, the ones for the new applicants in the fund will be assessed by a multidisciplinary committee, and invitations to submit will go out to those that are deemed eligible. From that point on, both groups are treated the same. There will be expert committee process and a multidisciplinary committee at the end to make final funding recommendations. For the expert review, we're planning for it to look very similar to the midterm review in that we will convene separate committees per proposal. And these committees will be tasked with determining the degree to which the facilities meet the assessment criteria and to review the budget that is presented. We do intend to involve virtual meetings between the applicant and the review committee to allow the committee to ask questions and obtain clarifications. The outputs from these expert committee meetings, so the reports and the assessments, will go to a multidisciplinary committee, which will examine all of the proposals and determine which ones best meet the objectives of the fund in order to make the funding recommendations to our board of directors. So to go through the timeline, I apologize, this is a bit of a busy slide, but as I mentioned, there's sort of two processes because of the difference between how we're treating the existing facilities versus new applicants. For currently funded facilities, well, for both, obviously, we're intending to release the call for proposals in early July. For the new applicants, we'll ask for the expression of interest in August and the NOI from both groups in September. The committee to determine the eligibility will meet towards the end of October. And so for new applicants to the fund, they will find out in November whether they're invited to submit a proposal or not. So we've got different proposal deadlines. Essentially, both groups, whether you're currently funded MSI or whether you're a new applicant to the fund, will have roughly 4 months from the time you are invited to submit a proposal to the time the proposal needs to be submitted to us. For currently funded facilities, that's a November 4th deadline for the proposals to come in, and we will conduct the expert committee reviews over the December through February period. For proposals that are being invited to submit in November, they'll have until February to submit the full proposals, and we'll do the reviews for those in March and April. All of this will lead into the multidisciplinary committee meeting in May for board decisions in June of 2022. So I'll spend the next few minutes going through the assessment criteria. So we'll have 6 assessment criteria for this fund, and really just to highlight some of the areas that are changed from the 2017 competition. On these slides, the criterion standard is presented first, and anything in blue text is new or different from 2017, and black text is identical to what we had in the past competition. Underneath the criterion standards, I'm presenting some of the information that you'd be asked to provide in the proposal. Sometimes edited a bit for brevity to fit on the slide, not that it may appear that way. And we've highlighted through underlining the text areas that are sort of new things that we're asking for in this particular competition. So as you can see with the scientific excellence, again, the focus is that it's used by researchers and highly qualified personnel of the highest caliber, enables innovative leading edge research, and this research leads to social health and environmental benefits to Canadians. The one new aspect that we're adding is that the research directions proposed in the facility strategic plan are forward-looking and reflect the state of the art in the supported fields. So essentially, this is making this particular criteria both sort of backwards looking, because in the past competition, we found that a lot of the information provided was focused on what had been done or had been enabled by the facility and current research that was ongoing. But there was not enough emphasis, or at least that the experts really wanted to see a bit more of what was planned for the funding period coming up. And so this is really asking you to address some of those future plans for what research will be going forward. And obviously, we'll ask that you describe those research directions for the next 6 years. We will be asking for your strategic plan as part of the proposal, so you can just make reference to that. You don't have to repeat everything throughout the document, but you can make reference to your strategic plan and describe those research directions. For the international competitiveness, so here it's largely the same as last time. We've added the statement that the loss of the capabilities would be a setback to Canada. This is something that's been in the as part of the MSI fund from the get-go, but has not been part of the assessment criteria per se. So this is not a new concept that we're adding, but it's something that we're maybe bringing more importance to really address that question of what are the highly specialized equipment, what are the services you provide, and why are they important, essentially? Why are they important for Canadian researchers to use these? We're also asking that you identify and compare your facilities, similar facilities worldwide. Again, this is something that was there in the previous competition, but we're asking you explicitly to do this because this is something that was requested by the experts, really to identify where your facility fits in comparison to others, to really demonstrate the international competitiveness of the facility. The need for CFI funding, I won't dwell on this because we've actually made no changes to the criterion. It's the same as last time, and really demonstrate that the requested funding is necessary to allow you to fully exploit your scientific and technical capabilities. So. Excellence in governance. So again, here the criterion we haven't changed, and I'll draw your attention again here. We do include the language around long-term strategic planning. As I mentioned in the objective, we're keeping it at a higher level, but it is still a critical component for this fund. And so we've included, we've kept that language in the assessment criterion. We've asked for a few extra pieces of information in what you're going to be asked to submit in the proposal. One is really looking at the long-term vision for the facility and sort of any major upgrades planned over the next 20 years. So this is really to look at that long-term planning aspect and to really identify what are some of the changes that may be coming down the road beyond even the current funding cycle for the MSI. This is also where we've incorporated some of the considerations around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And my colleague will speak to those a little bit later, but I just wanted to highlight here that we're asking you to describe EDI principles with respect to the board composition and with respect to strategic planning. And these are in the governance criteria. The management criteria, we've actually split in two. So in the past, it was both management and operations were combined as a single criterion. So this time we've split those two out to sort of make it easier to evaluate and address the specific components of each of these two aspects. The major changes in the management criterion, as I mentioned, so we've added data and cybersecurity into some of the aspects that we've listed, and also equity, diversity, and inclusion. We've also added a focus on the management team and the core competencies to effectively manage the facility. So we're going to ask that you demonstrate that you identify the key individuals, which was always the case in the past, but also demonstrate that they have the core competencies to manage the facility. We're also asking you to provide your plans or policies describing data management, research security, and cybersecurity. And again, for the equity, diversity, and inclusion, to provide a plan describing how measures have been or could be put in place to ensure the selection process is transparent and based on best practices. And finally, the last of the assessment criteria, operations and user access. Technically, as I said, this is a new criterion. However, it was part of the management and operations criterion in the previous competition. So the only new component is really assessment that access to limited resources is only granted following an appropriate selection process. And this, again, is not a new concept for the MSI fund. It still is, in fact, part of the eligibility criteria for the fund, but we are sort of bringing up the importance of the access by bringing it into the assessment criteria. The other change here is, again, looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion, and to ensure that the access to the facility is equitable. And so we're asking you to describe some aspects of that. So I will switch over to Michelle. Do you want to share, Michelle, or do you want me to?
No, you can keep on going, I think.
All right, I will keep the slides going. And
yeah, before we continue, I might pause here for just a sec. There's a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure, I don't see it while sharing right now. But
yeah, no, that's fine. That's why I'm bringing it up. And one of them, let me get back to it, is concerning the threshold for minor upgrades. Since there has not been a change from last time, how would you respond to that, Mark?
Well, I think we're going to essentially use the same approach. We don't want to set a dollar value because there are very big differences between the facilities that we fund. I think there's, sort of two orders of magnitude in terms of the operating costs. So I think it's going to still be a sort of case by case assessment. Our general approach is that if there's, if they're replacing something that's broken and it's an upgrade because it's a new model or a new instrument that has some extra capabilities, that's fine. If it's, we want to expand the facility by adding new features, new capabilities, new instruments that we didn't have before, then that's not the purpose of the MSI fund. So as I said, I don't want to, put a hard and fast no more than X dollars or no more than X percent of a budget, but it is going to be treated on a case by case. So I see the chat now, actually. So in terms of currently funded facilities do not need to submit an expression of interest. We will ask that you submit the NOI, but it will look different from the NOI, the notice of intent that will be required of new applicants to the fund. It will really just have the table of your anticipated costs for the next funding period and some suggested reviewers. We don't need the description of the facility and all of the eligibility criteria addressed. And an anticipated number of potential funded projects for this round and potential success rates, right? So that's very difficult to answer, actually, particularly for the MSI fund itself. What I can say is that certainly in the last competition, we had on the order of 40 or so notice of intent, which came down to about 23 or 24 proposals that were invited to submit, and we funded 17 of them. I suspect that all of the currently funded facilities, which is actually 16 now because Compute Canada is moving into Endrio, and that's no longer part of the MSI family, if you wish. So I fully expect all 16 will come in for renewal, and we can probably expect the ones that were unsuccessful last time may come back. We may have a few extras that are applying and deemed eligible. So, I could certainly see us up to about 30 proposals that we're assessing in the competition. I certainly hope it's not significantly more than that, but and then in terms of funding, as I said, there are orders of magnitude difference between some facilities versus others in their budgets, and so the total number that we can fund is going to be limited, but could vary quite significantly as well. The 60-40 and 40-60 formula differences will remain the same. So the facilities that are currently eligible for 60% from the MSI will maintain that. All other facilities, so existing currently funded ones and new ones coming in, it is 40% is the maximum CFI contribution. And that includes O&M and sorry, that includes the MSI funding and any infrastructure operating funds that are applied. So why don't we keep going with the presentation, finish that up, and then open up for a few more questions at the end.
Yep, so I'll take it from here. So to follow Mark's presentation on the assessment criteria, it was mentioned that we will integrate EDI principles in this coming competition. So CFI is really committed to the principle of EDI. You have on the screen the CFI statement on EDI, and it really reflects the steps that we want to take to ensure equity in our programming and processes, and to ensure that all institutions and their researchers can succeed. So regardless of gender, language, culture, career stage, etc. And we want to encourage collaboration, partnership, and engagement among diverse groups of people. So how will we do this in the next MSI competition? Mark, can you change, please? So we will be applying to the next the EDI principles on 2 levels. So the CFI will integrate EDI principles to our processes. So that includes the review panels, making sure that we do have diverse representation on our panels. We will review our language to be more inclusive, so all of in our documentation. We will accommodate reviewers, be more flexible in accommodating them so they're able to participate in our processes, and have our reviewers taken in conscious bias training to help them get over things that we don't take conscious of, biases that we are not conscious about. And we will also integrate EDI considerations into our assessment criteria. This is new. We have started this process in the last Innovation Fund competition, where we asked applicants to describe how they're meeting EDI considerations in their proposals, but it was not assessed. So we're going a step further with the MSIs, and we will ask our review panels to look at this and take it into consideration as an element of existing assessment criteria. So as mentioned by Mark, under the governance criteria, we will ask our panels to look at the diversity in board composition. So what are the steps taken to apply EDI principles when doing your board composition? Look at how the facility is taking into consideration EDI in their strategic planning. So how are you identifying systemic barrier to access, for example? Are you aware of what they are, and what are the steps taken in the long run to try to alleviate those? In the management criteria, we want to ensure that the EDI principles are followed in recruiting and staffing. So again, what are your measures? What can be put in place to make sure that your process is transparent? And in the operations, we want to ensure equitable and inclusive access to the facilities. So those are going to be sub criteria to the standard, but we will ask that you provide information specifically on those, so that our committees are able to assess them. Next. So Mark's been through this slide, just to show you where we are in the presentation. We will be talking about the NOI at this stage. So it was mentioned that there will be a mandatory NOI for all facilities, but it will be slightly different. So the currently funded MSIs will need to submit an NOI light. So what we will be requesting is the anticipated budget for 2023 to 2029, as well as a list of suggested reviewers. And this will be used for administrative purposes only. So for recruiting of panels, budget estimation, so it will not be assessed. But for the new applicants, eligibility will need to be assessed, and for that we will require a text on how the facility meets all 8 eligibility criteria. And in addition to that, we will also require some budget information. So the request for the next 6 years, 23 to 29, but also a historic budget. We do ask that the facilities to be eligible are operational. So if they're operational, they actually know what it costs to operate. So we will need a minimum of 1 year of operation, but this is what you'll see in the forms. There's also going to be a list of suggested reviewers that will be requested. This will be assessed at the NOI MAC, and then eligible facilities will be invited to submit a full proposal. So the full proposal. Mark has presented the 6 assessment criteria a little earlier. So you will be asked to address all those criteria in your proposal. We will have different page limit for different CFI requests. So for smaller requests, lower than $15 million, you will have 30 pages, and above $15 million, you will have 40 pages to present all the information that is needed. One thing that is a distinction from 2017 is those pages will include the budget justification. So take note that there will be no additional pages allowed for the budget. So it has to fit within those pages. And in order to make it fit, we encourage you to use tables, figures, and organize your information in such a way that it is easy for the reviewers to find that information and to assess it. We have made some changes in CAMS to eliminate the need to submit a separate Excel budget table. So all the budget information will now be entered directly into CAMS. The finance module includes the functionality for a multi-year budget for costs and contribution, as well as a functionality to present a high-level multi-year historic budget. So no additional attachment, no Excel spreadsheet, everything will be in CAMS now. We've also developed the functionality to specify units of a specific type of expense. So for example, for your personnel cost, you will be asked to include the number of FTEs that is represented that goes with that cost. There's an example of the table that you will see in CAMS on the slide. So on the historical budget, historical for a lack of a better word, because about 18 months of that budget will still be a budget in only 1 year of actuals, but we will be requesting numbers starting in 2020 to March 31st, 2023. So that's the funding cycle of 2017 to 2023. And then a 6-year forecast budget from 2023 to March 31st, 2029. In addition to the 30 or 40 pages, the budget information, as in the past, you will be asked to attach a strategic plan and a management plan to the proposal. The functionality has now been developed into CAMS to attach those documents directly. So again, no need to send anything by email anymore. One thing that is different than from the midterm review, for those who remember, the maximum attachment limit now is 20 megs per attachment and not total. So that will help you manage your documents. So within your management plan, if they are not included, we will ask for a decommissioning plan, your EDI policy or plan, data management, cybersecurity, policies or plan, depending on what is available, and your org charts. We don't want you to duplicate the documents. If they exist in a separate format, then attach them separately. If they're included in your management plan, then that will be sufficient. We're also requesting a list of selected publications. One big change is the requirements for CVs. As mentioned by Mark, we will be assessing the management capabilities or capacity of the management. And for that, we will be requesting management CVs of your senior management team and no researcher CVs. So your management CVs will be a 2 or 3 page attachment times 4 for your 4 senior officers. And also for the facilities receiving upwards of $2 million per year from the CFI currently, we will be asking for a transitional funding plan in case you were not renewed for funding in the next cycle. So those are the big changes, and we are ready to take questions.
So we do have a couple of questions in the chat already. Donc, de Érudit, merci pour le partage. Est-ce que la CI va renforcer l'accès aux ressources et présentations en français? Peut-être, c'est une bonne question, mais je vais peut-être suggérer que tu nous parles, si je peux trouver ton nom dans la liste. La voilà. Juste pour préciser, parce que je pense que je sais que certaines installations, ils ont juste leurs ressources disponibles en anglais. Je sais qu'il y en a certains qui sont au courant de cela. Ils sont en train d'essayer d'augmenter leur capacité et compétences en français et d'avoir plus de documentation disponible. Je pense que ça va être encore un cas de laisser les établissements justifier, les installations justifier qu'est-ce qui fait du sens dans le contexte de leur communauté de recherche. Mais je ne pense pas qu'on va imposer des exigences, mais c'est certainement quelque chose qui pourrait faire partie du processus d'évaluation. Les barrières à l'accès, par exemple, c'est une des choses qu'on leur demande d'adresser. Et certainement, la langue, c'est une de ces cas-là.
C'est ça, je me demandais si la question des services ou du travail dans les deux langues pouvait entrer dans le cadre d'une politique canadienne, dans le contexte canadien d'équité, diversité, inclusion.
Ouais, c'est un bon point. C'est peut-être intéressant qu'on pourrait prendre ça et voir si c'est du langage qu'on pourrait incorporer aussi. Là.
Merci.
So for, in the spirit of both languages, the question was around whether we'd be enforcing requirements to allow access in both languages and documentation in both languages from the facilities. And so it's certainly a good question and part of potential barriers to access to some of the facilities. So thank you for the question. There was a question, so Janet, was whether a standard CV template would be provided. We haven't developed one at this point. So I think it was, at least in my view, something that we don't want to sort of impose a enforced structure on you. Each proposal will be reviewed sort of by a separate expert committee. So I don't know that there's a need for a perfect standardization in the management CVs, but we wanted something fairly short, a 2 to 3 page short CV to demonstrate the management competencies.
There's another question. We can maybe go back to the deadlines after that. I'll just take the next question. Will there be template provided? Nabil, I'm not sure what kind of templates you were looking for, but we will have some examples of tables that can be incorporated in the proposals. As in the past, we will leave the assessment criteria section pretty much free form, so there's no template at that point. So I'm not sure what kind of template you were referring to.
I'm just curious if there's any, I mean, you're going to share this document that you presented today, I assume, and then I'm just wondering if there's some template heading, basically a package that we can get working on before the NOI. That's all.
So when sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mark.
Okay, I was going to say when we post the draft call, we will include it'll include the obviously the parameters of the competition, but also part 2 of the draft call will be the instructions for completing a proposal. And so in there you will, I don't think we have a lot of templates, certainly not for the assessment criteria section, but you will have more explicit instructions on what we're expecting in each of the different sections of the proposal and what we're looking for from a submission. I think in terms of templates per se, we have one that's probably more for the notice of intent for new applicants in terms of what types of information that we want to receive in the NOI, similar to the last competition where we had tables for user access and so on. And so you may want to draw from some of those for your proposal as well to address some of the assessment criteria. But those will all be up on our website by June 3rd. I want to I was going to say hopefully by June 3rd, but no, that's our plan is to put the draft call up by June 3rd. There's also a question from Dennis around budget templates. So in this case, everything will be entered in CAMS. And so what we'll have is essentially categories of expenditures in CAMS. So similar to the budgets that you fill out already, but you'll be able to sort of create individual items within each category of expenditure and identify, so it doesn't have to be, one item is all of your scientific technical personnel. What we'd rather have you do is break that out into logical categories that make sense for you or logical groupings that make sense for you. So you'll have, I don't know, with OTN, I guess, glider operations staff would be, one item in the budget, and you'd identify that as a personnel category, and then the breakdown of costs over the 6-year budget. And as Michelle mentioned, so because we have different categories of expenditures within the MSI fund compared to our infrastructure funding, for some of the categories of expenditures, you'll be asked for the numbers of FTEs, so full-time equivalents. And for other categories, it'll be the number of items, so typical within a CFI budget now. Other categories, it'll simply not ask for a number because it doesn't necessarily make a logical sense that there'd be, a number of electricity or something like this, right? So for some categories, you won't be asked for a number at all, but for the ones that are clearly personnel costs, we want you to enter the FTEs for those.
Do you want to go to the timelines again, Mark, and then we can
come
back
sure,
to Peter's question on research.
Yeah, let me find the timeline question slide and share my screen again.
I've gone ahead and shared it.
Thank
already,
you.
Mark.
Thank you, Alex.
Okay. So the question was only go over the deadlines again. So we are looking at putting out the draft call June 3rd. So that is the date where it will be posted for comments. So it's really a consultation. As this presentation is a consultation. We're asking for feedback. If you have some things that are totally out of whack or that doesn't make sense, please let us know. So June 3rd will be the official draft call will be up. We are looking at posting the call early July. So by then we'll have received comments, feedback, and then post the real call in July. And this is where it starts to kind of split into two branches where the currently funded facilities have nothing to send to us until the notice of intent deadline, which is September 20th. But new facilities looking to get funds will be asked for an expression of interest on August 10th with the same deadline of September 20th for the NOI. So up to there, everything is the same for both the current and the new facilities. September 20th is the NOI deadline. After that, we will be reviewing the eligibility of the new applicants with a MAC. And when we put out the invitations to submit a proposal, so November 4th, that will be the deadline for the current facilities to submit their proposals. So current facilities need to submit their proposals by November 4th. We will start reviewing those proposals before we get the new applicant proposals in February. So we're kind of stretching out the review, and we are giving equal length of time for the currently funded applicants and the new applicants. Both will have approximately 4 months to put together their proposals. So we're trying to be fair in giving each category of applicants the same amount of time to prepare their proposals. Every proposals are going to the MAC in May with a decision on June 22nd, 2022. And again, funding will start April 1st, 2023. So that will leave you approximately 9 months to finalize the awards. And hopefully all the partner funding will be able to be confirmed in that time. And there will be no funding gaps between the current cycle and the next cycle. Okay. So.
All right, so we had a question from Paul. So if the MSI facility is not incorporated and acts as part of a larger center, for example, the university, would the university's EDI policy suffice for the application? So I would say that whatever policy applies to your facility is the policy that we want described or included in the application. So if there are additional things that Intervac does specifically above and beyond the university's policy, then those should be described as well. If the Intervac simply follows the university's policies, then you can include that in the proposal.
There's also a question from Peter Stokes. Any chance on the use of MSI funds to assist research that is transitioning to innovation, i.e. MSI facility support for a startup or spin-off? So currently the research that is eligible through MSI is research to develop the facility and not research to help or support commercial activities. So this will remain the same in the next funding cycle.
So Volker was asking whether the reviewers will again be both national and international, similar to the midterm. So yes, I find at the expert committee level, frequently it's more international than national just because of challenges around conflict of interests. But yes, we will be recruiting both international and national reviewers. There's also a question, will other CFI competitions be open to us if we need funding for major upgrades? And yes, you are eligible to submit requests for major upgrades through our innovation fund or other companies.
For new facilities, will the NOI have to show $1 million historic budget for at least 12 months to demonstrate eligibility? And does a budget projected for 12 months before April 2023 count as historic?
So I mean, typically we've looked at the average over 3 years, for example, to determine the the threshold of the $1 million or at a year in minimum eligible costs. So I think what we'll have to do is see what it looks like. Some facilities, the budget does fluctuate significantly year to year. I'm also conscious of the fact that 2020, 21 may not be a typical year for a number of facilities for obvious reasons. So we'll have to take a look. But as I said, typically it's been sort of an average over 3 years that we've looked at for that minimum threshold.
Okay. The budget justification is included in the 40 pages. For a very large facility, it seems that it will not be possible to have a detailed description. I think it needs to be as detailed as possible. And definitely there will be follow-ups on an administrative side if we don't have enough information. But we are trying to limit the size of these huge proposals. One thing that was not discussed was the face-to-face aspects of the review process. So we will have the opportunity, the applicants will have the opportunity to present more details to the panels in a face-to-face meeting, to go into more details on the budget justification at that time and to answer any questions. We are conscious of the reading that will have to be done by our reviewers, and we would like you to stick to that 40 pages for the large proposals.
That's just it. It's always a balance between how much space to provide and how much material the reviewers would have to read, and making sure they have enough information to make informed decisions. So I mean, these are what we're proposing. Obviously, this is not cast in stone at this time, and if there are strong feelings one way or another in terms of the page in the midst or requirements for what we're asking, then certainly provide that provide those comments to us. So Kim, can you define research to develop the facility that would be eligible for CFI support? For example, could this include AI research to address extracting information from data collected by the facility in order to benefit all users? So I guess this is in the context of, sort of technology development type costs being eligible within the MSI funding. Typically, we've looked at these in terms of, is this developing or adapting either new technologies so that the facility can offer those to users, or developing new services, new protocols, and so on. So I on the top of my head, that sounds okay. But I think, if there's, any more details, it would be the type of thing I'd suggest contacting the senior programs officer and just making sure that we have all the information. If there's any question about whether it's eligible or not, we're happy to address those sort of offline with all the information on hand. Oh, Fred, sorry, I thought I addressed that, Fred. In terms of other competitions are open to us, yes. The MSIs can apply to our innovation fund for infrastructure. They're eligible. Well, with the host institutions or the administrative institutions can apply for infrastructure funding for the MSI through our other competitions.
Okay, so scientific okay, can you clarify who can the applicants be? Scientifically, it will be difficult to show the long-term scientific leadership. So in the applicants, what we're asking is for the senior management team. Examples of these positions, definitely the CEO, the chief scientific officer, the chief financial officer, can be the IT director, can be your chief operating officer. In this question, you're talking about long-term scientific leadership, then your senior scientific officer or manager would be that person. Definitely you need to show their management capability. You could show the scientific leadership in terms of participations on panels or high-level committees. What we don't want is a long list of publications or presentations that are regarding that specific person. We're not looking at evaluating the scientific capabilities, but the overall management and leadership in science in this case of the person.
I might just add as well, we would normally expect, as it is with the current ones, that either the scientific director or CEO of the facility would be the project leader within CAMS. So that would be the person that creates the proposal. But as Michelle elaborated on the management CVs that we will be asking for.
If there's anybody who would like to ask a question live, as we say, you are also invited to do so. Sometimes it's longer to type than it is to just raise your hand and ask a question, so feel free.
So I'm not seeing any raised hands at the moment or other questions. So I want to certainly thank everyone for their attention today. I hope we've given you some food for thought, and stay tuned for the draft call to come up on June 3rd. As always, you can always send us any feedback. Send it to your senior programs officer, or send it to the msi-ism@innovation.ca email address, and we'll make sure to take a look at that. Otherwise, thank you again for being with us for this past hour, and for those of you who were here for the previous workshop sessions. I hope you found them all very useful, and I'm looking forward to the next competition. We'll see what comes in.
Mark, if I can ask just one question, this is Daniel Banks here. Just
Yeah,
to
of course.
follow up on my question I typed in the chat. So the case that I'm thinking of is an emerging facility. And I would say by the NOI deadline, it will not have been in operation as a user facility for a full 12 months. But by the time 2023 comes around, then maybe it could have been in operation for a year or two already. And so is that going to be a problem from the eligibility point of view? Because it wouldn't really have that historic track record by the time of the NOI deadline.
Right. So I think the best advice I can say is to essentially, provide that information in the NOI, and then when we assess the eligibility of the facilities with the multidisciplinary committee, they will take, that information into consideration when looking at the facility. Typically for the sort of I call it the administrative eligibility criteria, the CFI do a first cut. In terms of, do you meet threshold? Are you operational? Are you owned by or submitted by an eligible institution and so on. But I mean, certainly I can see us having some flexibility there to allow you to submit a full NOI that would then be assessed for eligibility against all 8 criteria by the multidisciplinary committee. And then they would make that determination, that judgment as to whether you should come in for this competition or not. Certainly, I think in the past we have recognized these types of scenarios. We've had other cases where a facility was not fully operational at the time of the competition, and we've had some flexibility to allow them to perhaps come in at a later time point. And so if there's some ramp up time and so on, then maybe we could consider this at sort of a midterm position in the cycle, because we recognize these are long funding periods. But I think we'd have to take a look at it case by case. I mean, I would recommend that the multidisciplinary committee be the one that sort of look at that and make that recommendation to the CFI.
Okay, thank you. That helps clarify that it's not a black and white situation here. So thank you.
We try not to be, but so, Jeter, I see you've got a hand raised.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. My question was just to clarify in my mind what you mean by core competencies on the excellence in management assessment criteria. Yeah, do I understand correctly that that's the core competencies are addressed in that first sentence in that criteria, the operations, risk mitigation, financial, data, cybersecurity, and human resources?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't have a sort of defined list of competencies that we're looking for, because that would vary depending on the nature of the facility. So it's going to be essentially an expert committee judgment for what those are. But essentially, what you've seen, what you've listed, those are some of the key features that we think essentially everyone should address. So.
Okay, and additionally, you'll give the committee the freedom to define those core competencies based on the specifics of the proposal.
Yeah, the specifics of the facility and I mean, obviously for Snow Lab, someone who's familiar with mine operations would probably be important, where that's not relevant for anyone else. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There's a question from Dennis from OTN.
Well, first of all, thank you for much needed presentation. It's helpful as we embark on the next round of call, on the next call for funding. My question is regarding the 60/40 formula for existing grantees. Do you look at the formula on a year-by-year basis or on the cumulative?
So we look at it at the cumulative level.
Okay.
But we won't, well, I guess by looking cumulative, I mean, we won't ever exceed the maximum percentage at a point in time. So you can't have higher than your maximum percentage at the beginning going down later. You have to, it can be lower at the beginning and go up And so some years can be over, but we won't front load our contribution, if you wish, to a particular facility's operating costs.
Thank you. I just needed to clarify that, because then there's years where you go over the 60%, but the cumulative over the duration of the funding period is still within the 60% or lower for that.
Right. So that wouldn't work if the year that you go over 60% is the first year. But if you're under the first year, you can go over the next, I guess.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all. And if there are additional questions, feel free to send them to us, and we'll try to address them. Otherwise, we will post a draft call, and we will probably do a webinar once all the call is up. And oh, sorry, I missed a question.
Yep.
Donc, la question, c'est est-ce qu'il y a quelque chose dans le pipeline pour les installations régionales et locales? Pour l'instant, la réponse est non, mais on ne sait jamais qu'est-ce qui s'en vient dans l'avenir. But for now, no, there's nothing in the pipeline for regional or local facilities. MSI light. No? OK.
Oui, je pense que c'est tout.
Merci tout le monde. Thank you, everyone.
Merci beaucoup.